I have been a member of a gang since I was 7 years old. My brother is in prison for life. My best friend was shot and killed while we walked down the street. Last Wednesday, Tiffany Ames from Trinity's Counseling Center led a role-playing exercise for the whole church staff. Tiffany works with young men committed to the Department of Youth Services, young men who have grown up in a world run by street gangs and who know violence firsthand. So this exercise is not a game. It's about the life and death issues faced by young people who struggle to find their identities and their futures as they look for affirmation, support, and love, just like each of us. They have to navigate complex systems of rules, spoken and unspoken. The rules of family, gang behavior, school systems, social service institutions, economic systems, criminal justice systems, just like each of us. My overwhelming sense after that exercise was how bewildering and isolating these systems tend to be. While most are set up for good reasons and with good intentions, the results are that a young person is literally trapped within this complex. You cannot visit your grandmother because you would have to cross lines of rival gangs to get there. A court order forbids you to have contact with your mother because she has a criminal record. You cannot be caught with your friend who carries a gun because your next offense will send you to juvenile detention. You've heard about college, but no one you know has ever been there, and no one can help you start the process. Your school forbids signs of gang affiliation, but giving those up feels like giving up your own identity. Every day, Trinity staffers try to help young people of Boston navigate these systems. They're counselors, mentors, and life coaches who themselves learn how to maneuver, walking the halls of the schools, coming to the detention centers, taking texts and phone calls at all hours, and engaging what I learned about car therapy, conversations held while they are riding from one place to another. I just want to be a reliable, positive presence for them, says Tiffany. They have been let down so many times. Today, our year of the Bible has brought us to Exodus and the giving of the law to the Israelite people. Most of us have heard of the 10 Commandments. We might even be able to recite one or two. What we heard read today is the beginning and the first commandment. You shall have no other gods before me. But then we heard some more specific rules from the following chapters. You shall not spread a false report. When you come upon your enemy's ox or donkey going astray, you shall bring it back. You shall not pervert the justice due to the poor. You shall not oppress a resident alien. Perhaps you're surprised by the specific nature of these commandments. Maybe the references to donkeys seems quaint and irrelevant. But what strikes me is God's concern with the everyday activities of our lives. The intent of the rules is to build a community of trust and respect that derives its structure from a God who cares about our lives and our relationships. And the entire code is predicated on our understanding of who we are, people liberated by God, brought out of slavery to live together in harmony. It's no accident that these passages begin with God's statement of who God is. The I am who spoke to Moses has been revealed as the one who brings the people out of Egypt to lead them into a new land. The covenant that God is making is premised on not forgetting who and whose we are. The new people that God is building are to remember their origins so that they can demonstrate God's desire for all people to live together and prosper in freedom. And the commandments, the rules, are God's loving gifts to establish that communal life. We've heard only a few of the rules today. There are lots more. Taken as a whole, they contain a very strong sense of social justice, of God's concern for the poor, and God's sternness in dealing with those who are the oppressors. And they're downright countercultural. Rules about forgiving debts and giving property and gleaning rights to the poor strike us as incompatible with a system of capitalism. And the constant reference to care for resident aliens presents a challenge to legal and economic systems. Even the reference to the Sabbath contains an interesting concern for others. When we are commanded, in today's words, to observe the Sabbath, it's for the benefit of the laboring animals and the indentured people to give a time of rest from the demands of constant physical work. The laws function to create a community in which persons treat each other with respect, where there's sharing of resources, generosity, and caring for one's enemies and strangers. It's a structure for living together in harmony and freedom. The challenge for us as people who believe that we are called to live in covenant with God is to apply these rules as principles for our lives while recognizing the circumstances in which we find ourselves. I am far from being qualified to speak definitively on Jewish law. Fortunately, our speaker in the forum today is such an expert, and he's helped us see how Torah, God's law, shapes the lives of Jewish people. If you were unable to come to that forum just now, I urge you to listen to it on the web. What I am saying is that what we read today should cause us to think about the way we live our lives, the systems in which we participate, the effects of criminal justice and incarceration, the economic consequences of widening gaps between rich and poor, access to educational systems, rules of class and color, and systems based on fear and revenge. Perhaps it's not just random chance that has brought us in this year of the Bible to consider these matters, the laws, on the Sunday that our liturgical calendar designates as the reign, the rule of Christ. We've come to the end of the church year, the cycle of God's coming to earth in Jesus, living, dying, and rising, and continuing to be among us as the Holy Spirit. Next Sunday, we will begin the cycle again in Advent. Today, we focus on Christ exalted, given the title of King. But the gospel passage we read seems anything but exalted. It's an account of Jesus on the cross, dying between two criminals. His title, his crime, is displayed above him, the King of the Jews. Is this irony? or mockery or proclamation. It's a scene of violence and torture. The systems of the day have judged Jesus and executed him. And as he's dying, we hear him praying for his enemies. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing. In the midst of terrible physical agony, Jesus does not give in to despair, nor to thoughts of revenge. His focus is on care for others, despite their cruelty and hatred. When one of the criminals joins in the mockery, the other one refuses to participate and instead asks to be remembered by Jesus. Perhaps he's heard the prayer for forgiveness. He acknowledges that he is receiving justice. He looks to Jesus for mercy, and Jesus reassures him. What strikes me in this scene, as I think about it, in light of what we just read in Exodus, is that despite the violence and cruelty that Jesus is experiencing, he is still reaching out to those around him to offer forgiveness and to reassure those who understand the love that he is demonstrating. It's a poignant picture of community in which God's forgiveness and reconciliation are not defeated, not by violence, not by hatred, not by death. Jesus reassures the repentant thief, "Today you will be with me in paradise." The point is not pretty pictures of pearly gates in heaven. The point is the comfort that Jesus gives to a dying man. "You are not alone," says Jesus. Nothing can separate us from the love of God, not even death. That is the kingdom, the community that God longs to build. For Jesus, for the Israelite people, and for young people in Boston, understanding and building community is not a game, it's not an academic exercise, and it's not some nice story for somebody else. It's a matter of life and death, and that is true for all of us as human beings. We are victims of oppressive systems, and we are also the oppressor through conscious or unconscious participation in systems around us. Today's lessons give us glimpses of a new way of living through structures and attitudes that foster life in community. These are God's rules for systems that break down the walls of race, class, and wealth, rules that promote harmonious living because we are not engaged in exploitation or revenge or hoarding or relying on privilege. The Torah of Exodus and the life of Jesus Christ show us that there is another way, a way of living based on care for each other, a way of forgiveness and generosity. We are not promised that there will be no struggle. In fact, we see that risks must be taken and that sacrifice is required. But we are promised that God is with us. As we live into the community promised to us, we will find each other as brothers and sisters, and we will know God's never-ending care for us, and we will never be isolated or alone. In her book, Traveling Mercies, Anne Lamott tells about an elderly woman in her church who recounted being lost as a young girl. She had lived in a large city, and during an outing, she had become separated from her family and completely at loss on the streets of an unfamiliar neighborhood. She was terrified, crying, and walking alone. Finally, a police officer spotted her and put her in the front seat of the cruiser. They continued to drive around until she spotted something familiar. It was her church. She turned to the officer, and with all the confidence of a 7-year-old, she says, "You can let me out right here. This is my church, and I can always find my way home from here." My friends, our challenge is to find our part in building a community, God's kingdom, in which all are safe, all are loved, and all can find a way home. God is showing us the way. God is leading us there.